It is time to rhyme. I feel like I should be saying, walrusy poems about cabbages and kings, because it's the Ides of March, when kings die and mobs rule and empires are founded. And well, okay, I've been reading a lot of Girard about scapegoating and collective murder, and the way in which throwing rocks into a pyramid on top of an innocent victim is in fact the origin of culture and civilization. And realizing we are still in that problem that we've been talking about, and we'll be continuing to talk about, of what on earth is the Trinity. And tonight we have a very special meditation for you on having eyes to see that which you cannot see if you are not attuned to what kind of sacrifice Christ made on the cross. Welcome to the Mosaic Ark. We're a podcast now. Did you know? So I hope you all knew. Welcome, podcasters. Those of you who are listening on Apple and Spotify and Amazon Music and wherever else you can put in the RSS feed. We are now audio as well as video, which means I realize. Do you realize what we've become now?
I don't know. I left for a day and came back, and suddenly there was an RSS feed.
That's right.
I leave for one day, and all of a sudden it's everywhere. What are you doing?
And Mel, who is our magnificent video editor, thanks. Those of you who watch on YouTube and recognize we have these marvelous 15-minute clips. It's thanks to Mel, because she snowboards her way through all of our chatter and jibber jabber and picks out the best moments of that. So Mel and I somehow managed to realize that we could put all of our audio that we can in fact download as an MP3 off of unauthorized TV and put up for those of you who listen, who prefer simply to listen. Although we do encourage you to subscribe to unauthorized TV, to join us in the live streams and be able to chat with us, and watch the images and so forth. Do you understand what this makes us now? We are live on unauthorized TV, and of course also on Telegram, my channel, Fencing Bear at Prayer, which means I am, of course, both Professor Rachel Fulton Brown and Fencing Bear at Prayer. And if you're just completely confused about who I am in Telegram, Ancilla Marii, which is the Latin for Handmaid of Mary. So we are live streaming on unauthorized TV and Telegram. We post videos, which is our visual format, at Unauthorized and on YouTube. And now we are audio only in our podcast form through rss.com, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and other places where you can stick in that RSS feed. So what does that make us?
Viruses?
No, a trinity. Come on, work with me, lady. No. It's like, so now this is, I see it's like we are live as the Father, incarnate and visual as the Son, and spirit only as a podcast. I am sure that's just straight up blasphemy, and now we're doomed. The demons are going to come. Forever. The demons are going to come get us and tell us stop being so satanic and divisive. That's a hint.
The digital crowds, the bots, or the people that act like bots. they'll come and chase us like Johnny.
Oh no! Yeah. So for the
Running.
I don't actually have that in the pictures today. But if you came because you saw my ad casting today, with Johnny Depp being chased by a mob of ortho bros, and the caption being, "I only said and the sun." Which then, of course, with the filioque, gave me my understanding of how we now exist in the digital realm as a Trinitarian manifestation, because the father of all of the streaming records both the video and the audio for us. I also recorded, I hope I'm recording on my own laptop, so I'm not sure what that makes of but the father is the source of both the video and the audio, which therefore means the father, UATV, is the source of both the video that we put up. It would be a more perfect analogy if I put that video on the YouTube too, and now in the hopefully even more widespread format of the spirit flying simply as I'm sure this is working, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I get chased by hordes of ortho bros as well. So.
And the sun.
That's even without the filioque clause.
Well, the thing is, I think our version is actually properly ortho because we get the audio only from the unauthorized. But that feeds into the video too. But the audio, the pigeon, the messenger pigeon, the carrier bird version that flies on our electromagnetic waves as a dove, does it come through the sun or not? This is, I'm not sure. You guys, you realize this is a long commercial to please subscribe to all of these different ways to catching our live stream, which is both incarnate and digital. And we're trying to figure out what that means. Are there good analogies in our own experience for understanding that mystery that we call the Trinity?
I think so. There's definitely good analogies for explaining the incarnation.
Well, I hope so. So this was, you realize that this is the to be continued forever, because we are going to always be talking about God in some form or other. But this is my continuing to be continued off of the intervention that Milo arranged with E. Michael Jones and Patrick Coffin and me to talk to Owen about the Trinity. And one of the things that I talked about there was this analogy that I learned from Dorothy Sayers in her The Mind of the Maker for talking about the Trinity, which and it to this day still the most like living version of the description that I've ever come across. I do not like the scholastic logical dialectic version of things, and you know that's one of the in the UAT community, although things have carried on in a rather different fashion from what we thought they would start with a simple debate on the Trinity. But anyway, the orthodox version of things that Jim Bob was trying to articulate of the energies and the fulfillment, I don't even know what he was talking about, right? It's a sort of definitional game that I have not chosen to participate in because I find it does not capture the living reality of the encounter with God that I think is what we are praying for, and certainly participating in the liturgy in the hope of touching. Anyway, well, go ahead.
It's like explaining sheet music note for note and with all of the notational marks and the what's it called, the time signatures and everything, versus sitting down and listening to the whole symphony. It's just a completely different experience.
She does it so much more concisely than I do. Exactly. Me and my linear verbal read endless books from the kilt says it's listening to music. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And
well,
go ahead.
Surround sound. It's surround sound God in the liturgy. So we have to like step into that experience. And it's not really something that you can accurately describe if you're just going over the particulars of sheet music. I mean, it's good for some people, but not for others, especially if you're inclined to want to have an experience.
Well, when we talk about
expose your senses at the same time.
Go ahead. Yes, I'm excited in talking about it. It's like we talk about our God as a living God. We want to live with Him. We want to live in Him.
Yes.
And it's a sensory experience as well as an intellectual experience. And somehow those scholastic definitional descriptions to me, get simply to that intellectual thing and lose out everything that you were just describing and I talked over you on.
It's kind of what happened to the cops. It's appropriate. But look, it's a tricky thing, because if you come into exposure to orthodoxy online, you're instantly going to be smacked in the face with that kind of scholasticism, because that's how it's translated on the internet with the debate me bro approach, which works for some people. I mean, there are a lot of people who need to have church matters explained to them like that, but I didn't come into orthodoxy like this. So for me, it was like looking at a foreign language. Sort of, it was like hearing the symphony and then learning that later on people had such thing called sheet music and musical notation. Right. Whereas I just knew it. Oh yeah, that's just music. Completely different. A completely different way of seeing the church. I don't think one is better than the other. It's just I think Westerners now, they're over reliant on the scholastic, because Westerners are really, really intellectual. They really way too heavily reliant on the intellectualism.
What's the scientism and the fear of seeming irrational. Thanks Enlightenment.
Excuse me.
The fear of being made seem to be foolish because you can't, go up against the I mean, not even the mathematical debate stuff, which I think Owen has rightly called people on, right? Saying three, it's the mathematical analogies are not, in fact, a proof of anything. That they're nice mental sort of models potentially, but they don't convince me. I mean, the Pythagorean triangle stuff doesn't convince me either. And so I often feel like Johnny Depp being chased by guys with lightsabers, not just saying "and the sun," but saying, can you prove this? Prove what? Right? I'm trying to prove my faith. I can't prove to you faith. I can try to give you descriptions of things that seem to make sense to me and that chime with my experience. But that faith only comes, as I experienced it, simply as a gift of the Spirit. It's there, and the thing is, I think it's probably, I mean, it's our experience. It's always there. The gift is being constantly offered to us, and the problem being whether or not we can perceive it. If that's accurate.
Yes. If your ears are open and you can hear the music or not.
Right. Or your eyes, and what do you see and what can you see? So there's an open parenthesis here that the book that Dorothy Sayers wrote about, where she talks about the Trinity, is called The Mind of the Maker. And now I can't remember whether I've talked about it with you on the streams, but I'll everybody knew. Here you go. That she says, well, it's foolish to worry about using metaphors to talk about God, because everything we talk about is in metaphor. That language is inherently metaphorical, and that it's always pointing to things through analogy, and fundamentally saying that, well, we use anthropomorphisms to talk about God. It's like we use anthropomorphisms to talk about everything because she says that's our only yardstick. Yeah. We are human. So if we are talking about flies or dogs or mountains or rivers or planets or the solar system or anything, we're always talking about it with ourselves as the yardstick for understanding. So to say, oh, we shouldn't talk about God using human categories, it's like, well, what else do we have? Those are what we have. We have a human yes. understanding. So the kind of put your brain somewhere else that it isn't. It's like, well, think like an angel. We don't know how. We have to, so we think only in analogy and metaphor about anything, not just God.
Yes.
Step one.
and sorry, my brain just went
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just words as Polaroids of um of things, isn't it? I mean, that's how human beings have created their language, taking little sonic Polaroids of things and arranging them in a particular way. How could you make how you couldn't represent something that you had no that was beyond your own ability to see? It's not possible.
Right, and that we put things together in our imagination from things that we've seen. So the fancy word here is mimesis. Class, repeat after me. Which means like representation or imitation. We've been talking about mimetic when we talk about Rene Girard, and that comes from this representational copying, imitation. That everything that we do, I mean, we say it's art, right? And E. Michael Jones has actually been talking about this over the last year or so, that beauty is our mimesis. Beauty and art is our mimesis of nature or creation, or our response to you were just now talking about music, right? The degree to which we are trying to represent our experience or apprehension of whatever it is that we call creation. And creation, of course, in the creed we talk about creation as both things visible and invisible, so that we understand that there are creatures there that we don't have sensory perception of, like angels. And that the invisible world is as real as the visible world, and that God is creator of all of those things. So the degree to which we try to represent these creatures in our own creations, it's all imitation. This mimesis is our imitational act. And that, I mean, what Rene Girard talks about is how pretty much everything we do as human beings is founded in imitation, primarily socially of each other, so that we see someone doing something and we want to imitate that. And that's how we learn, right? How do babies learn language? They learn it by imitating their parents and people around them speaking. So that you're always, we couldn't learn if we couldn't imitate.
Yeah, that baby gargle, where they're trying to figure out the way to move. And one of the reasons why the masking that happened during the COVID era was so disastrous for developing children when they were very young is because they couldn't develop, because they lost mimesis. They'd lost an ability to mimic what the people were doing with their mouths and facial expressions. So it is a huge part of developing as a human being, being able to mimic and copy and mirror back what you see.
And particularly, as you're saying, faces. That we're always the thing, and the thing that we mirror most is each other's faces.
Yes.
Always. So we're mirroring faces in our emotional expressions, and in our reactions to beauty, and in our feeling of belonging in a group. All of those things comes out of this mimesis of each other. And as Girard talks about it, although he doesn't really talk about it this level, at least anything I've read yet, but that this kind of mirroring, this imitation that we do with each other, ramps up the more we're sort of, you're in a group, right? And we want to understand. I think you and I have been touching on this already, but I'm like put all back in the moment, that if we want to understand why the COVID stuff played out the way it did, it's because we're so mimetically inclined. We're going to copy each other. It's not mass formation. So, how does the mass formation work? Well, it's because we're imitating each other, and that seems to amp up.
Things are trending on the internet and in real life.
Yeah.
Well, it's difficult to not be part of the group. It's difficult to be the anomaly from any group. It's not a comfortable experience. It can be quite painful.
But it's interesting that it is painful. It's like saying, I'm not imitating everyone else correctly. It's very, very painful not to be in sympathy and harmony with the way the rest of the group is behaving.
I'm wondering where this comes from. Is it just do you think it's just a survival thing? Or is there something deeper to it spiritually?
Well, the next thing that Dorothy Sayers says is that we're made in the image and likeness of God. And I mean, so that's interesting because she says that, you know, what do we know about God? Well, what we know about God from the Bible, the first thing we know is that he created. And what is interesting is that the scriptures are rather frustrating if you want to read them, say, mythologically, to find out what the Lord is like, you know, Yahweh or you know, the creator. Basically what we know of God from the Bible is he created. And that's where Sayers starts. She says, we're, you know, the one thing we have information about is in the mind of the mind of God. He's a maker, he's a creator. And the second thing we know is we're made in the image and likeness, and so therefore imitate the making. And that, you know, that being I mean, to your question, I don't know why it's so painful, right? It's very interesting to say it is incredibly painful not to be imitating each other. And that same painfulness presumably also afflicts us when we're not imitating God, because that is in fact the image that we're made to be imitating. We're made to be the likeness of our creator. And then what Sayers says is, so, you know, we're anything that we can know about God is only through that reflection, that imitation. And therefore what we have to understand is the act of artistic creation. I mean, in her metaphor, she's saying that's the mind of the maker is what we are most invited to mirror by our creation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I'm just thinking then it's this pain of being outcast from the group and not mimicking the group is somehow connected to a removal from creative capacity. Because human beings are, as we've talked about, naturally city dwellers, naturally creators of cities. Humans live in tribes, groups. We're not independent. We're not able to live alone. Even in the beginning, God says it's not good for man to be alone, so he makes a helpmeet for Adam. So it seems like this inbuilt need to be with people, and then having that connection linked with our creative capacity somehow. Primarily, excuse me, primarily, obviously, it's a biological procreation, but then it extends into everything else.
Well, it seems to be, so it's on the one hand that, you know, as babies, we have to imitate. I mean, what the other thing, I think Girard does talk about this, saying we don't really have instincts. I don't know about that. I mean, Steven Pinker wrote about the language instinct, right? And saying, okay, so we are inclined to, and there's certain capacities that we have, and we just have them as human beings. One of which is to speak. It seems to, but given the enormous range of things that we're able to learn to do, skill wise, and we learn them by imitating people who have practiced them previously. So everything that ramps up for us, I mean, our entire sort of experience of being civilized, cultured, city dwellers, something like that. Cities are going to come in this because they're founded on murder. Okay, it all depends on our ability to participate with each other in this mimesis. And so that Girard would focus on the mimesis, and then Sayers focuses on, okay, so the mimesis of God, which this one more step of getting to the Trinitarian description. She says, so what we want to understand is what's a work of art. if we're sort of when we're creating things, we're mimicking God. What is it we're mimicking? And this goes back to my little analogy about our UATV live streams with our videos, and then our podcast, audio and visual. That the best analogy I've ever seen for the Trinity is hers, which is saying it's like a book. Okay, so our tech is a book, right? Mm-hmm. That's funny. Isn't you make the world and it's like a wheel, and then everything's like wheels, and then you wait. No, it was a funny meme that as soon as you invent wheels, hey bro, everything's a wheel. And you invent books, hey bro, the world's a book. And then you invent mechanical clocks. Hey man, the world's a mechanical device. Now we're on computers, and so clearly what it is. But going with the book, that. It has a Trinitarian reality, which is first it's an idea, right? And she talks about the idea is like the image of the Father. You have an idea for a book. How many people have you ever met? It's like, I could write a book. I've got an idea for a book. It's all this and da da da. It's like I'm going to write a book, and I'm like yeah, sure, fine. What do you have to do in order to write a book? Second person, you have to suffer. Because incarnation is in time, right? The idea for the book may exist all in your head in a flash. Great. But if it's going to exist actually as a book, you have to sit down and write it, right? Which is compositionally, even whether you're the one dictating it and some scribe is copying it out on, wax tablet or something like that, you still have to, in time, breathe it out. Right? Incarnate it. And that, as every author knows, if you've actually ever written anything, that takes labor and suffering and passion. And so Sayers is brilliant when she's thinking about Christ and Jesus as incarnate in time, because she gets the problem of writing a story, right? So there's the idea, and then there's the energy, she says, that goes into the incarnation of the book. And then once the thing is, as it were, like mine that I have on my lap right now, written out, it exists in the world to affect other people. And then she says that's like how we understand the Spirit acting back on. And you could say your own book acts on you once you've written it. It's like once you've written this book, it exists, and then the thing is, it exists all at once, as it were, right? Once you've incarnated it through its composition, it then completely exists as the published thing, which then can, in media terms, affect many, many other people because it's now existent. But you did actually have to go through that incarnational process of writing it in the first place. So simply saying you had the idea for the book. And then she goes through this lovely thing in The Mind of the Maker, how there are all these different heresies. If you don't actually have the Father, the Son, and the Spirit working together, there's no book. There's no acting in the world on human souls if you didn't actually write it out and publish it.
No, that makes sense, because it could be a book, it could be a narrative story, or it could be a book of sheet music, but the same thing applies. It has to be performed in order to be acting on other people. And then, of course, even if you write a piece of music, you can listen to it and it can affect you back. This makes perfect sense to me, as opposed to people arguing over the font, or the other details, which seems to be the
yes, arguing over the font. It's why did you use Palatino and not Times New Roman? Well,
this typeface is ugly. I don't care. That's not the point.
Well, but you might want to choose the most beautiful. So, I should say I just misspoke. The publishing of it, you don't have to publish as another. That's the missionizing, right? The book exists once you've incarnated it, and there's only one copy. It still can work on people in a way that, if it was just in your head, it couldn't. So I've tried to, I like this. I use this metaphor when I talk about Tolkien's understanding of creation, and Luvatar speaking or playing the music or proposing the theme, because it's a similar sort of understanding of creation as a work of art and the effect of art on others once it's been manifest. But that incarnational element of creativity is the Father breathing, the Son carrying the. It's why in Christian theology we say that the creation is through the Son, that the Father is working through the Son to to make things. And in medieval iconography, it's always Christ who is the one that's creator, because it's through the sun that all this fashioning happens, the making part.
Yes, he's the carpenter.
Right.
Yeah. No, this makes sense.
So you have to record the videos to send them out. So we do them live, and anyway, all metaphors are ultimately inadequate. But the process of understanding ourselves, making in the image and likeness, I recommend Sayers as a very energizing metaphor of idea, energy, and power. And then you realize it is all one thing. The book is still one thing, but it has these. And maybe that's modal, I don't know, but it seems to fit. I mean, it's certainly better than the Trinity as a three-pronged triangle or something, which is not as dynamic.
Well, it's not human. I mean, if you like humanity, it's very difficult when someone wants to run up to you and say, "Here, watch me explain God in shapes." You know, it makes me feel like I'm back in primary school with my teachers saying, "You have to learn this." I say, "Why? I don't want to learn about it."
Right.
You know, because you need to, because it's important. Okay, and then the brain goes, "Dude," you completely tune out because there's no relevance to anything. If it's not humanizing, or if there's no link to again, that kind of goes back to us measuring everything by being human beings. But very few people are going to sit there and get very excited over shapes. The Pythagoreans were weirdos because they were running off and having a little secret club of people that were getting excited over shapes. But that, that's not normal. It's not that most people are not going to want to connect with God via a triangle.
Well, the triangles are more like angels. They're discarnate, and of course Christ connects with us through the incarnation, which is why it's so necessary. I mean, this is my large frustration with the Trinity discussions is it shouldn't be about the Trinity. It should be about the incarnation. We should start there, because that's the only way we have contact with God. The way God reveals himself to us is through these workings in time, because we're incarnate and he made us incarnate. So, the sort of incarnation as communication with us, all of the sort of proving the Trinity without us in the picture. Well, we can't, because as Sayers points out, we can't think about anything except through our own experience. And so we have more people listening. Let me maybe I should catch up on my our chat. So welcome everybody. We got Lodi No More, Casey, and Lodi No More and Casey have been talking a lot. Burning Pitch, and Casey saying writing is easy. You simply sit down the typewriter, open your veins, and bleed. We're gonna be bleeding in a second, right?
Yeah.
Casey, that's automatic writing centered on you. Well, okay, Lodi, it's a metaphor for the difficulty involved in creating. Lodi No More, a rare copy. Haha, all good. Right in the morning then. Well, okay, so we're inspiring them to worry about what this incarnational exercise is like. That's the first step. Okay, so who was Jesus? More to the point, because we're talking about the death today on the Ides. Why does he die on the cross? And then I think more specifically, what do we see at Mass? We need some pictures now, because we can't do this without images. Salvific, satanic, salvific. What's the difference between these two sacrifices?
First twin of the day.
First twin of the day. This is our only twin. I showed this one last week too, and we still need to think about this twinning. This is the big one, because in the study of religions and in human history, in the history of the West in particular, it has become the fashion to claim that these two pictures are identical. The Aztecs cutting people's hearts out and feeding the sun with the blood is in fact mythologically speaking, or so the argument goes, the very same thing as looking at Christ on the cross and recapitulating that sacrifice in the Mass. It is our problem today to figure out why this is not so.
Just a small problem.
Just a teeny weeny little problem that will overturn the entire, culture war claim that all cultures are the same and we should be multicultural. No, we shouldn't. We should be Christian. And we're going to try to explain why, and also explain why in the course of one video. No, we meant to make several. It is not sufficient simply to hold the cross up and say, this is our banner, rally round it, let's go to war. Days will, guys, that's not going to do it.
Like football teams.
It's not going to do it.
Football teams.
Yeah, you don't get to just be Aztec versus, Christian and rally and fight on teams.
No, I have to put a little asterisk into this because Australians tend to use the word multicultural as a euphemism for multiracial. But they're different categories. So when we say multicultural, we're not talking about ethnicity. We're talking about culture. We're talking about religion.
When you and I, yes, we're talking about cult. Yes. We're actually talking about worship.
Yeah. No,
or cultivation,
if I say,
or all those things that are actually cultures. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if I say in Australia, I'm against multiculturalism, people are, they're shocked and they're outraged and they think I'm.
Yes, we need to distinguish before them between cult and the Mass and Pentecost.
Yes, definitely. So, okay, so we've got the twin pairs there. Mm-hmm. We've got the Aztecs, and then we've got Christ in the Mass, and these two rituals are the basis of the cultivation of people.
Right.
These are two different cults. So this is the basis of cultivating, this is the basis of creating the culture. It's got zero to do with ethnicity and everything to do with the orientation point for the human soul.
So the thing is, I think there's a reason that there's an ambivalence, equivocation in your Australian use of multicultural to say ethnic, because there is a way in which the cult is the ethnos. So I agree
with that, but I just have to break it down for the basic Stacey's in the back, because otherwise they'll say that.
Well, this is what we're trying to do, right? And I do have my Renee Girard. These are the two that I've read so far, The Scapegoat, and this is what I'm reading right now. I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. I recommend I See Satan Fall Like Lightning if you want the kind of easy read version where he's figured it all out and he's laying it out very clearly. Scapegoat is still a bit of a exploration, and it's also coming at the end. I'm reading them in reverse order. I haven't read Violence in the Sacred yet, and then there's another one, Things Hidden Before the Foundation of the World. Reading list that what Girard is trying to explain is in fact the origin of culture and the origin of, therefore, human society, civilization. And he makes a beautifully strong argument for the Gospels are different from every other human religion, and we're going to try to show you why he thinks that over this video and several others probably. But starting with this problem of what the sacrifice is, and why the Aztec human sacrifice is different from Christ's death on the cross, even though in many ways they can look very similar. Okay, that was a bit of a footnote, sorry. Culture. There is a way in which the culture, this sacrifice, creates the people. It's exactly what creates the people. Therefore, it is actually ethnic.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe it's like, let's go to.
Oh, I'm following.
Okay, I'm gonna focus in on.
I have to get Australians. Look. This place is the dystopian, utopian nightmare of the Enlightenment. We have to explain to the Australians why this is important, because we are not having this discussion yet. We're 10 years behind you guys.
I'm not sure we're having it yet. This is I'm having it. You and I are having it. Right, but I think for the most part, the United States, even so far as we have things like America First now. I mean, I do those guys good, you know, and hi Gab and everybody, but you guys are missing something. And you know, the Nick Fuentes crowd, and so it's saying Christ is, we need Christ, we need Christ, we need Christ. I have yet to see anybody in the public conversation, anybody, right? In the comments, you can say whether or not you've heard anybody, but I have never heard anybody actually lay out the argument in the way that we're about to try to make it necessary for Christianity, but not make it into yet another of these ethnic
red team, blue team
ethnic cults.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is, I mean, this is what people fear. It's like, oh, you know, you just say your God is the only God, but what about this other group of people? They say their God's the only God. Clearly we just have battling gods, and you should stop, you know, arguing that yours is the only one, and stop trying to make everybody be Christian. I'm sure you've heard that, right? One audience.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Audience.
Well, they're relegating religions to being soda pop. So it's Coke versus Pepsi from the vending machine, because this is how Western civilization sees religion. You know, you choose Coke, you choose Pepsi, it's Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew, whatever. Everything's equivocated. It doesn't matter.
Right. And what we need to sort of, the first step here is to unpack why Western civilization sees religion that way, as you know, vending machine choices of different sodas.
Yep.
Okay, everybody ready? So what do we see right now? What I'm showing on the screen is that this it's a Spanish drawn image of the Aztec sacrifice, where the victim is lying on his back. I understand from the Mel Gibson movie Apocalypto why they have to lie on their back, because that means that you can just cut under the ribs, right, and pull the heart out.
Yes.
I don't think I'd ever appreciated that way. So they've thrown him. They've got him over his back so that he can pull the heart out through the gut, I guess, under the ribs. And what's very interesting in this image is we have the heart sort of flying up in the air, which seems strange, on this ribbon of blood. And according to the myth, apparently, this is the way the sun gets fed.
So they're feeding in their minds, they're feeding the source of all life with the hearts of human beings.
Right. And that without that blood source, the sun goes out.
Interesting. So for them, doing this ritual, doing this human sacrifice is literally a matter of life or death.
Right. For it's a matter of existence for the whole physical world, because they see the sun as feeding on these blood gifts, and therefore they also see. This is one of the reasons that in the multicultural debates, it's sometimes been argued, well, but those victims, the people, and I think they're usually men. I don't think they did women. No, they did do women, because Diaz sees them in the cages. But the people who are killed in this way do it voluntarily.
Is that accurate?
I mean, you know, one of our famous accounts of, you know, how these people are collected together is in Bernal Diaz's account of the conquest of Mexico. And, you know, he said the Spanish found them all in cages, collected to be sent. I mean, it seems like they're taken as prisoners of war, captives and sent as tribute to from the surrounding towns to Mexico City, where they're sacrificed. And that the whole, I mean, this is in Apocalypto, it's really well done, right? Just saying that the whole group, the whole crowd,
Gibson did a beautiful job.
Watching this ceremony sees it as necessary for their own flourishing. And in the movie, in Apocalypto, in the movie, they do it well, because the men, you know, sort of as they're about to be sacrificed, are telling to each other, like, die well, right? Die courageously, so that you don't go weeping and moaning. And so there's a dignity to it in the sacrifices.
So in my head now, I have this picture of Aztec life, and the entire economy of the Aztec civilization relies on this sacrifice. This is central to their economic understanding, because they're still agrarian. So they need the sun. The sun is the source of everything. So this human sacrifice is central to the currency of the Aztecs, which is sunshine, to grow their crops. So it really wouldn't matter if they were volunteers or not, because in their head, I'm just thinking, like, they're completing a circuit. So volunteering or war captives, it wouldn't matter, because in their heads they're just feeding the battery of their civilization. I find it very interesting that modern people are trying to justify this by saying it's voluntary.
Oh, well,
it's like justifying indentured servitude, you know? Yeah, you're a slave. Oh, it's okay, you're indentured, so it's not real slavery. You're kind of semi-volunteering. It's very odd. Sort of a very tricky category distinction there.
And yet, we just did it. As Casey said, sounds like the Aztecs were worried about global cooling. And then, Casey's on a roll tonight. Involuntary volunteers. Quote, you voluntarily took that COVID vaccine. Yeah. So I have, this is not tonight's episode, but I have a thinking about how we're not going to end up with, like, big, we're still waiting. We're going to, but the truth is coming out and there's no uprising about it. We're actually talking through, I think, why it's not going to happen. Anyway, okay, so these volunteers are giving their hearts to feed the sun. Why would they think this is the reality? Right. Well, because, as Gerard explains, they have myth, or they have stories about how this is necessary, and it's sort of like myths embody like we had myths about science and the necessity of following science, and the consensus is huge here, right? It's like the scientific consensus says. Well, okay, the myth says, and this is actually in the Scapegoat. He's talking about the great American myth of self-sacrifice, the Aztec myth of the creation of the sun and the moon. And this is but both the sun and the moon come together in this story. He's abbreviating it, and it's still probably too long for me to read out in full. But so the gods come together. He's saying that in the mythologies, you have to understand there's always this kind of collective murder, but it's disguised and divinized, and the victims are an interest. Anyway, so the gods all come together, and they realize that they don't have any light for the world, and so they say, who's going to take it on? Who's going to be the one that who will take the burden of lighting the world? And it's going to be both the sun and the moon. But they light a fire that they're going to basically sacrifice themselves into, and the gods arrange themselves on one side and the other. The fire is getting very high, and one of the gods tries to Tekusekatl, the one who's going to be the sun god, but he's too scared.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other god, I should have practiced this. Nan Awatson jumps in, and when he jumps in, the moon jumps in, the sun sees him, throws himself into the fire, and then after that, you have both the sun and the moon. Now, Girard breaks this down, saying that the sun can't do it until he sees the other one do it, and then he's mimicking him, and he jumps in. But what's interesting about this, from Girard's perspective, is you've just read the description of a murder, but in the mythology, it comes out as, oh, the gods have done this, and the gods are deciding this, and the gods are going to do this. And now in the fire, it says when Teku saw that Nana had cast himself into the flames and was burning, he gathered himself and threw himself into the fire. And it is said that an eagle entered the blaze and also burned itself, and for that reason it has dark brown or blackened feathers. Finally, a tiger entered. It did not burn itself, but singed itself, and for that reason remained stained black and white. And they say that after this, the gods knelt down to wait to see where Nanu becomes sun would rise. Oh, I got them backwards, sorry. And when the sun came to rise, he looked very red. He appeared to waddle from side to side, one side to the other. No one could look at him because he snatched sight from his eyes. He shone and cast rays of light from him in grand style. His light and his rays he poured forth in all directions, and thereafter the moon rose on the horizon. Having hesitated, Teku was less brilliant. Okay, I'm sorry. Guys, sorry, that's Nanu one, that's the sun. That in the mythologies, and this plays out in things like the Assyrian mythologies and Marduk and stuff like that, or Kronos eating his children, and you have the gods being cut in pieces and scattered around, or the gods dying, and then what Girard hypothesizes is that all of these stories actually have at their core a collective murder of an innocent victim. But the significant thing about all of them is the group the group either first makes the victim completely guilty and then makes the victim a god. I think I've fast forwarded a little bit. None of that's going to make sense yet. Rats. Sorry.
I'm following. All right, okay. So we've got the victim who is scapegoated by the mob, by this particular group of people.
Right.
By being made guilty of whatever crime it is, who is murdered, and then turned into a god, which is idolized. Right,
that's the primary mechanism. The problem is what Girard is doing, and I think he's kind of he's like he figured out this in the mythology stuff, and I think that's in the first book I haven't read yet. And we're obviously going to get to the Gospels and say this is a similar story, but it's completely different. That what is horrifying to recognize is that all human society seems to come out of this kind of collective activity, and the collective activity is centered on the identification of the one to blame for whatever bad thing is happening. The crops are failing. There's a plague. There's, it's too much rain. One or the other. You're going to blame one person, kill them, then whatever happens. I've left out some steps. Sorry. Whatever happens afterwards, it seems to be better, and so you repeat this ritually, right? This is how you end up with rituals like we need to feed the sun with the blood. I think I need to work us back a little more through all of that.
Yeah.
Duh.
You've just described opioid addiction.
Really? Okay. Say it that way. Maybe that'll make more sense.
Well, you have the repetition of the ritual that needs to happen in order for everything to be okay again. And then what happens, especially, different drug addictions will have a similar thing, but I know about opioids. So the odd thing is, like, all of the trauma that would exist is subsumed in the drug, which then becomes the focal point of everything, and so all of the all of the many problems become one problem, which is the drug that the junkie's addicted to. So instead of having this, in my experience of conversations with hardcore heroin addicts, it's that everything in life, everything that's going wrong, suddenly is that, oh no, I'm addicted to heroin. If only I could get off heroin. When actually, it's not the problem. There are other problems there, but everything's poured into this syringe, and it's subsumed by the opioid. So the opioid takes on the scapegoat role in the life of the heroin addicts.
That's very interesting.
And then there's the cult practice that develops around it. I mean, junkies all tend to look sort of similar after a while. You'll see someone who's been on heroin for some time, and they've got the look on their face. You can see it in their face. The physiology changes. So again, there's this kind of mimesis happening in the group of junkies where they're all beginning to look the same. They kind of have a culture and the cult that surrounds this particular drug. And then heroin becomes the scapegoat. That's what you've just described to me in Aztec human sacrifice.
That's kind of terrifying. As far as I know, Girard never went there with this theory. So I realized I needed to back up. So I spent all that time talking about mimesis and imitation and such, and to explain why you end up killing this other person as a group. This is where the tricky part comes in. It's saying, okay, so where does violence come from? Right, which is different from saying, it's like where did the addiction come from? Because the violence is a kind of addiction, I think, as you've just described it.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
The thirst for blood.
Right, but this is Girard's first step was trying to figure out where that violence came from, right? It's like, okay, we're going to make a scapegoat, and he's going to carry all our sins, and when he takes on all those sins, then we'll all be better off. And that, to go to the Gregory Mass, here, we see the priests sacrificing the bread and the wine in front of an altar. And in this particular iconography, it's very strange and pretty horrifying for most modern viewers to look at, because at the center of it is an image of, it looks like Christ rising out of the tomb with his wounds and the bleeding. And he's surrounded by all of these other little objects, which are the images of his torture. Right. So it's actually, here we have the priest. In this one, it's St. Gregory the Great in the story, but although this is a late medieval image, the story is associated with the earlier pope. And that he, as he's celebrating the Mass, they're showing in the iconography that the Mass is somehow also this recapitulation of all the tortures that Christ experienced, that Jesus experienced. Mm-hmm. And when people look at that now, they tend to see, oh yeah, you're doing the same thing as those Aztec guys cutting this guy's heart out. It's just a torture scene.
Right. So their interpretation is that we're preventing catastrophe via human sacrifice.
Well, see, that's actually the simplest version. And in fact, the one that gets you to multiculturalism is a good thing, because you just have different gods.
Yeah, it's interchangeable. Doesn't matter who it is. You can change the image behind the sacrifice, and it doesn't matter, because the ritual's the same. That makes sense.
And they're interchangeable. And let me see if I can put it's taking me trying to get these steps clear, and then realizing, the sort of, talk about the incarnational problem. And I'm trying to get you incarnationally, tidily into this understanding that came to me in a flash when I started reading Girard, and realized that it was actually showing me things that I'd been trying to figure out for a long time. Guess what? This is how it works. That Girard's first step was to try to figure out why the violence in the first place. Why do we end up fighting at all? Why do we end up in the rivalries that we do that then escalate into the violence of team versus team, which is something of what we were talking about last time with the
Yes.
pairs.
Yeah, the twins.
The twins. It's in fact, he argues, because we first imitate each other, because we, you know, so we imitate each other. We learn to want things because the other wants the thing, right? So in the sun and the moon story, you know, it's jumping into a fire and burning up, right? And at first the moon won't do it, and then sees the sun go in, and then the moon will go in. So even something like that, once we see the, I think we did talk about this one last week too. We see the mask, and oh, I want a mask too, and it's illogical. But we've seen, you know, it's like you said, you know, we see this one person doing this thing, and we want it to, you know, fashion, hair color, you know, sex change. I mean, this mimetic contagion is typical of humanity. That will and you know, it does explain culture, because it's like, culture is highly imitative. You're going to see art forms, you're going to see behaviors and manners and customs, and start imitating each other. So far, sort of so good, because at least that means we can, you know, collect together and act together in certain kinds of recognizable behaviors. The problem starts when one person sees something that they want that another person has, and you know, a beautiful woman who you covet as a wife, a cow that you covet, a house, covet. This is why Girard says the Ten Commandment is actually the most important, because it's the one that says, "Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not covet the things your neighbor has." Because, in fact, and this is then where Girard is starting to explain the spiraling violence, it's the coveting of what the neighbor has that spirals into the violence that ends up with the scapegoat killed under a pile of rocks. I can unpack that one a little bit more too, but it's
yeah, I think you're gonna.
But it's like that. It's like, so all human society says, it starts with, they start imitating each other, we start behaving together, but at some point things become a scandal to us. And he also talks a lot about the stumbling block, the scandal, the wanting, right? And I think the best example that he gives is when Peter in the gospel says to Jesus, you know, "You're the Christ, and therefore, you know, now what else does he say?" And Peter and Jesus says to Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan." What's the Satan? What has Peter just become for Christ? And it's, Girard explains, a stumbling block. That Satan manifests as scandal, manifests as the stumbling block. That Peter, in seeing Jesus as potentially the leader of this big movement that they're going to have, you guys better be listening, don't be this, right? Peter, if Jesus had said to Peter, "You're right, I am," what would have happened was a spiraling rivalry, and we would have no church, because instead of Peter being the rock, he ends up denying Christ, and that matters too. Jesus would have fed the mimetic rivalry, and Peter would have wanted to become the leader next. Wow. Have we seen this anywhere?
Just once or twice.
Constantly. Even in this community recently, right? There's a desire for the same object, in this, you know, being the Messiah, and that the way Jesus answers Peter is the only way you can do it, is saying, to get the scandal, if you stumble over that mutually desired thing, the scandals are going to build and build and build and build and build. And then what you end up with is this intolerable situation where it's just going to spiral into worse and worse and worse violence.
This makes sense. So Christ responds to Peter in this way and says, "Get behind me, Satan," because otherwise his mission becomes a revolutionary movement instead of salvific. Right. And then it would actually start to look like the Aztec pyramid human sacrifices.
It would look exactly like it.
Yeah.
It would look exactly like it.
because we'd have to go running around plucking out all of the Pharisees and the Zealots and anyone in the opposing teams, the Sadducees, the Essenes, anybody that was not quite right and not in lockstep would need to be completely violently opposed because
Yeah. Do you see why I suddenly went, oh my gosh, it's all here?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got the mimesis, which is human and necessary. The rivalry, because we desire similar objects, and the coveting seems to be it's like the negative side of the mimesis, that we end up coveting the things, and that Girard also explains that the things we only desire things that we see other people having. We learn what to want by watching other people, and so we start wanting the same things. Those rivalries spiral up, and the scandal comes when Satan is the desire, the accuser, the desire for the desired, and these things spiral up, and you end up in this spiraling potential for violence, which then this sort of magical step, this transcendent step that takes place, until, interestingly, you end up with some kind of marginal person. The Oedipus example is really strong for Girard, that he's lame, right? So because he had his feet stuck together when he was a baby, so he's lame, and he's also recognized in the myth as being responsible for parricide and incest, right? He kills his father and marries his mother, and he then is recognized as responsible for the plague, right? So you get one of these characters, these or like in the Sun and Moon story, the sun wobbles, right? Or say this, like, so you could, what Girard argues, you can see in these stories the despised, crippled beggar, lowly outsider or something. Or Dionysius, right? It works in the Bacchae too. That suddenly you see that the group sees a character that can become the demon, become responsible for all this bad stuff that's happening, which is in fact happening because of the rivalries, the scandal and the rivalries that have been all escalating. And we've seen this happen. It happens with mobs. It's lynching, right? You find that victim, you all focus on it. It's like the common enemy, right? Suddenly we're all going to focus on that common enemy, kill it, and in killing it, it ended up in pyramids of stones, because stoning was a collective way of doing this, right? Throw the rocks at the demon. The demon dies, and then pieces come, but it's become, because you've just engaged in this collective activity of murder.
So there's this vortex of mimetic rivalry that builds up. So this is the image that I've got in my mind. And then this has to go somewhere. It has to be directed somewhere. Otherwise, it can't dissipate. It's just going to keep building and building and building and building. So the crowd finds the focal point for it to direct all of this intense energy of rivalry onto. And once it's done, then the vortex dissipates, which is why the crowd are satisfied and they can declare peace. Right. Yeah, this makes sense.
But of course, the rivalries are going to come back, because people are like that, and you're going to have to do it again.
This is drug addiction.
Yep.
You're describing drug addiction. Yeah. Yeah, the itch, it's never quite permanently scratched. Yeah. Yeah. The whole ritualized experience of the trauma vortex that comes up and then builds and builds and builds and builds until it's loud and screaming, and you need something to direct it all to in order for that energy to dissipate again, even momentarily. You're describing drug addiction.
it is it I thought we were doing drugs next week. Okay, so on the stream,
My head's been in this space for a little while.
And I'm not sure we're going to get to my green screen examples today for what we see in the invisible, but okay, so I mean, what Girard, I go back to the Aztec sacrifice. What Girard is describing is the way in which this kind of addictive violence is addictive in human society, and that culturally, each culture is defined by its particular sacrifice. I mean, like not its method or something like that, but that cultures develop around, and this is what polytheism is. It's like all these murders, and that in the way Girard tells it, that each city would be founded on a murder. He talks about Rome, right? I started in my opening tonight talking about the Ides of March, right? And the Roman Empire is founded very clearly on one of these collective murders. Shakespeare does it, right? That the senators come together and kill Caesar together in the Senate House, and that in fact all subsequent Caesar was a family name, and all subsequent emperors are Caesar, right? It's like they all become, and then Caesar himself, Julius Caesar, is divinized, right? All the emperors are divinized after that, and Girard says it's coming out of this mechanism of the victim is transcendent and becomes divinized because of the effect of that collective murder of him. That collective murdering of the victim is the sense that you get that person was a god. I find very like creepy and weird, and maybe we want to talk about that a little bit, because I'm not sure with the Aztec sacrifices they saw these people as divinized. I mean, they eat them, they roll their body. I mean, it's in the movie, right? They roll their bodies down the steps, which is part of it, I think, and then they chop the limbs off and eat them. But they are sort of like with this mass partaking of the victim, and taking his energy, taking his strength, participating in the strength with the sun, I think.
Well, they're cannibalizing the trait of the scapegoat, which is that the scapegoat has been the repository of the collective violence. So there's an energy there that goes into the scapegoat. It's dissipated from the crowd because it's redirected and put into the scapegoat. So then cannibalizing the scapegoat means that you're taking in all of the energy. I mean, it sounds crazy, but like this is what they seem to be doing. Taking a little piece of it, which is essentially like eating the heroism or this false heroism of the scapegoat, and that they've endured this experience of receiving the violence of the crowd, because none of the other people have done it, only the scapegoat. So it makes sense that the crowd then fetishizes the scapegoat because they've done something that no one in the crowd has been willing to do, and until that point they haven't been the scapegoat themselves. So this monster takes on a trait which is godlike because they've been raised to a position above the mob in being killed by the mob. This makes perfect sense. They have something the mob doesn't have, which is that they've been initiated into the experience of being a scapegoat already. I'm not sure.
This is making a lot of sense. This is very good.
Yeah. So eating them is cannibalizing that trait as a kind of preventative vaccine, if you will, against this mob violence.
Yes.
I'll eat the idol god,
gosh, yes.
Lowercase g, who could do what I have not been able to do in order to protect me from the thing that I am most scared of, which is this mob violence.
Wow.
And we will deify this monster.
Well, I started thinking about George Floyd.
Appropriate.
I did a little bit of Googling, and there were a few people that had written about Renee Girard and George Floyd back in 2020. But that one of the interesting things about him. Okay, so one, I was thinking, why did that work so powerfully in the summer of 2020? So that we had riots and marches and fires. I mean, this sort of collective violence that was unleashed on the United States and around the world because of his death fit all of the things that Girard was describing about what happens when the mob kills the victim.
Yes.
And one thing was, and this maybe will help, because not everybody knows the myths, but we all know what happened with Floyd, and that he, in subsequent, and it's sort of split in the political thing as, oh no, he had put a gun to his pregnant girlfriend's head or something like that. And he was a drug user, and he was known to the police for he got piled with all of the crimes, all of the sins, all of the monstrosities, right? So he was definitely, I mean, this was the public didn't know that before he died, but it certainly learned that after. So he carried the scapegoat character of the monster. And then it's like, I got my artwork all wrong tonight, never mind. That he ended up in like divinized in art, right? That they're murals and statues and movies, and it's like all he got divinized in the way that we divinize, which is images spread all around the world, everywhere. Yes. And then everybody was marching in his name as so this is where we live in a post-gospel moment where we can see the scapegoats as innocent, thanks to Christ, which is jumping ahead a bit, but one of the things that Girard says is very, very important to recognize. But on the other hand, I think Floyd did also play the character. He played the character of the old pre-Christian scapegoat too.
In the sense that he fed the son of America.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting.
We're thinking of everything got set on fire. Yeah.
It's an economic mechanism. So you have to invigorate the society via these sacrifices. I'm wondering what happened after George Floyd's death. There were riots. There was, I mean, I can't work in linear, so I'm like,
that's okay. We're not doing linear tonight. We ended up in the mythological, just like we were supposed to. And I will tell you guys, we'll come back to it.
In the lounge of mythos.
Yeah. No, we'll come back to it, because I had this whole thing about how do we see through the St. Gregory Mass iconography to the invisible? I'm not sure we're going to get there. Let's work on this for a bit.
Okay. Well, Floyd had to reveal something invisible. Right. This is what they're doing as well, right? So it's like he reveals the invisible sins of the crowd, of the society, because no one's talking until suddenly someone dies, and then suddenly everybody's talking. What are they talking about? They're talking about the collective sins of the group that have been heaped on this one person. And the euphemism that everyone used was, of course, white supremacy, the specter of white supremacy that was lingering everywhere.
Right.
But I think it was more than that too.
I think it was much more than that. I think that's, so this is part of why I think that's why we're not seeing riots now, even though people are very clear about things about like the damage that had been done with the vaccines. And we keep talking about how, there will be riots, and they're not, right? And you could say, all right, so the Floyd riots, the BLM riots were engineered by actors who, set up marches and things like that and fed into it. But yes, I think that probably
brick making companies.
Yeah, I saw bricks on the sidewalk today. No, I think they were just redoing somebody's driveway. But that doesn't explain why it worked. right? There's always, we have regular efforts to
Mm.
have parades and rallies and, you know, collect together and we're all gonna, it doesn't always work. And summer 2020 and allegedly the height of the plague. How cool is that, right? It's like plague, COVID pandemic, giant scapegoat rallies the same
Yeah.
summer.
Mm. Well, in my current understanding of this, for him to have been scapegoated, he has to have revealed something to the crowd about the thing that they don't want to really acknowledge, which is their own particular sins or their own monstrosities.
Right. I think we're confusing our chat. Let me say. So Annie, along with COVID, it was a demand for cult, the white people being forced to kneel. Yes. So let's since we ended up here and that this is a good place, let me tell you what else I was thinking about Floyd. So I think
Okay.
one of the things that happened is that I didn't watch this video, but everybody else did. That people watched him die.
Oh
Right.
God.
And what isn't that interesting? It's it's like, why Floyd from all of the other, how many, I would have to Google it or look it up right now. It's like, how many people have died in Chicago of gunshots and, accidents.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're going for a record year. Thanks, Mayor Lightfoot. She's not going to be mayor anymore because everybody got upset with, and that's not, the thing is that she's not being scapegoated. She's just being voted out. Right. So
Yes.
it's not. I think it's not just that he died, and it's not just that he died in custody with the police. I think it was as much that everybody saw it.
It was filmed.
And so how would you end up with a collective scapegoat in a context in which the entire world? It's like we're not just one city throwing rocks at a person who's wandered into the walls. It's the entire world watched it. So everybody who watched that video participated in his murder.
Mm.
And that's, I think, probably one of the things that triggered the whole mechanism. Because it became a collective murder because everybody watched it. And then they were part of it. They were part of the mob who killed him.
This makes sense. Even if they hadn't, I mean, because if they'd been there physically, they would have had the choice to prevent the murder. But because they're looking at a recording, they're looking at the streamed version of the murder, they don't have the choice. This is why they're rioting.
Maybe. I mean, they had the choice not to watch, but everybody watched.
Yes, everybody watched. But it's not the same thing, because if you're watching some crime that's happening in front of you, you have a different set of choices, which is, I can step in physically to prevent this from happening. So this explains, it's a different kind of trauma. You're seeing something happening that you're physically powerless to affect.
Well, the thing about the collective murder in the sacrifice is the mob goes along with it. So I think that the going along with it in this context is you watch that video, and you sort of allowed yourself to watch that murder, and then you become part of it. And that in Girard's understanding, it's like once the mob has participated in this consensus of focusing on the victim, it creates a kind of unanimity of the crowd because you've all participated in this murder. I think that the sort of liturgy as participation is really critical here, that you're participating in this one event. That's why watching mass on live stream didn't work. Although this did, right? Watching Floyd die did somehow collectively fuse everybody who watched it into a community.
But it was a pre-murder. It was the murder before the vortex. because people are rioting. People rioted the way everyone expects them to riot because of the COVID mandates and the destruction that the mandates had on civilization.
Right.
Everybody,
They're not going to. I don't think they're going to.
they've already done it by protesting Floyd's death.
So this is...
It's being flipped.
Yes, I think it's been flipped. There's something that's been flipped.
Yeah.
I think that the vaccination and being marked or unmarked, I mean, all of the pressure that followed after, look, think about what happened after the riots, right? That was what was strange about them. All these marches and everything in the summer of 2020, big collective activity, allegedly in the midst of this rapidly spreading, there were no vaccines at that point.
Yes.
I think it was all of those marches somehow that made the rest of it happen. That then everybody stayed inside and stayed locked down and stayed, you know, and then it spiraled into the mimicry of the masks and the lockdowns and the wanting the vaccine. And it was the taking of the vaccine that made you participate in that somehow.
Interesting.
Okay, so there's another piece. I think we're starting to get enough of the pieces that maybe my one moment understanding of Girard is starting to play out linearly. Although chat, we may need to help you ask whether what didn't make sense yet. Oh, now I forgot what I was saying.
The Flash, getting to the
I got to that, yeah. But there was another piece that I was starting to see. This is you're learning what it's like living in both of our heads tonight, right? It's like Rachel going, "Oh my gosh, it's all there." How hard I have to work to put things out in linear order so that you can actually understand what I'm seeing. Kilts is even worse.
Incarnated. Yeah.
Kilt's seasoned pigeon. Come on, she's seasoned, you know, like the Holy Spirit flash of gifts all at one time.
Everything everywhere all at once.
So Casey's asking, are you saying the vaccine was a sacrament? I think so, but we need to unpack exactly how. Oh, now I remember. Thank you. Okay, so what? No, this is very interesting. This is another piece of the riots and the marches and the what the crowd needs. That the mimetic rivalry creates likeness. It creates a lack of difference, right? So we'll go back to our salvific satanic scientific. The problem, Girard theorizes in this, it's like, why do we spiral up into the violence at some point? It's because, in fact, the community is experiencing too much sameness. I mean, to a certain extent, that the rivalries have all focused on the same object, and so everybody's, you know, like triggered to fight very easily. But, and this is where I'm always thinking in terms of the Dr. Seuss story of the Sneetches with the stars on their tummies. Right, you start off with the situation where only the star-bellied Sneetches have high status, and the not star-bellied Sneetches have low status. And then this guy comes along with a machine that can put stars on their tummies, and then there's no star, and then everybody has stars. At which point the star-bellied Sneetches want to get theirs taken off, so they get theirs taken off, and then it's more high status to have no, and then they switch back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And at the end, who knows, right? Now that's the hopeful version of social peace, but realizing that I think what calmed everybody down is we're now differentiated into vaccinated and not. That's why we're not going to have riots now, because we've actually been redifferentiated.
We've made distinctions.
Yep.
That's fascinating.
So what's weird, it's like there was all this pressure to all become the same, and some of us refused, and then everything's calming down, and those of us who refused the pressure to all become the same are sitting there going, why aren't you guys upset? It's like, because there's nothing to be upset about now. And in a sense, there's no mimetic rivalry fueling anything in the way that there was in summer 2020. And this is, I'd say, now we've got Mel going boom shakalaka, loading no more, woo woo. Yeah, it's all woo woo. We live in the woo woo.
Yes.
Yeah, but we're still not to Christ. That's okay. But the mechanisms that Girard is describing do seem to be accurately observed, which is what matters for the understanding of human dynamics.
Well, this explains the language around whites versus people of color.
Oh.
Well, white is nothing. It's no distinction. It's monochromatic. And people are obsessed with pox because everybody wants to be of color, meaning they want distinction. They want color, meaning they want the spectrum split. They want white split up into the spectrum of, colors. So Floyd dies, everyone's rallying against white supremacy, but they're rallying against the homogenization of the Enlightenment culture. That makes perfect sense. It's because they want to be colored.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we're just gonna sit here going whoa for the moment.
Yeah, because you don't have a tribe in white.
We don't.
You don't have tribal distinctions in white. You're just all Aztecs.
Okay, we're all empire, right?
Yes.
Which is bad. Well, I mean, so this is interesting. We have to be Christian, otherwise we end up with the spiraling violence. We'll get to that sometime.
Yeah.
But what you've just described is, I do think this is, yes, people were, I think you're right that people were upset about not being able to be something. Like anything. I mean, I'm actually, I was walking around the neighborhood today and saw what looked like a little elf. Her hair was beautifully blue, right? She's walking home with her dad from school, and I'm like, with like eyeliner that would rival yours, right? And I think she's like 12 or something. And you say yes, and so look at that's what it's like, the hair colors and the makeup and the clothes and stuff. Like, of course, people are. It's like what Marshall McLuhan, may he rest in peace, pointed out even in the 60s of what he called the international mufti. It was like,
oh yeah, this like, I wear everything from everywhere,
and everybody wanted to be all colored and like, I'm a hippie. Come on, I may wear the same thing every day on these live streams, but that's because my autism, it helps me to get into the mood. That the desire to be in the color and the light and the rainbow. We've talked about that, and yes. That Floyd. People wanted to be in the rainbow. They wanted to be in those parades and marching, and I still haven't put together why the COVID vaccines gave them the satisfaction of being in the rainbow. That's eluding me still.
Well, you get the distinction without having to leave the empire. This is the sprout of a thought right now. It's more of an intuition than anything. But because what has happened to us here is that we have this uncomfortable relationship with Australia as a thing, because the founding murder of Australia isn't on home soil. So we have a very unstable relationship to the identity of being Australian. So we're very sensitive to what's happening in America. Whatever gets broadcast from America comes here. We're very sensitive to it because we don't have our own founding mythology keeping us cohesive yet, except if you're a wog, because then we've got Christ. But pouring everybody into multiculti, it all starts to look the same because it's interchangeable. Like how you were saying before, people not being able to see the difference between this Aztec pyramid and the mass. Just pouring people in and then being told, oh, it's fine, we're multicultural, everything's okay. Actually, what that does is it creates this tension because everything's equivocated. So this is the vortex. It's like there is a rivalry because we're constantly being told in being multicultural that everybody's equal.
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Yes.
inversion of the language in saying we're multicultural, but there is no there's no multi anything.
Right.
There's no multiplicity. Everything's equivocated, which means it's all the same thing. It's just repackaged, rebranded, however you want to particularly do the same thing. So people are being told this over and over and over and over again in Western multicultural environments. That would explain the vortex. They're becoming white by being put into multiculturalism. It actually takes away. I know this is going to sound so
makes
nuts,
total sense. They don't want to be white. They want to be colored.
They don't want to be white. They want to be colored, which is healthy. But because of the category language that we're using, people don't know how to verbalize what they're actually saying. So they're going on white supremacy. What they're actually fighting against is being homogenized in this soup of whatever you call it. That's the mimetic rivalry. Well, people wanted the distinction.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's so Casey's saying the COVID vaccines gave them belonging to something, a group. Yes, but we're trying to understand the sacrifice at the center of the group. Now that I figured out and that we're now talking about, the Floyd sacrifice was critical in what we all lived through. Mm-hmm. And that it was at the beginning of whatever this crisis that we've been through. And it's like, it always seemed dissociated from it, but I think it's totally part of it. It's also the reason it's like everybody loves making predictions. If I get to make, if we get to play prophet, although recognizing the prophets end up in the Bible being the ones that turn into the scapegoats, I'm not sure we want that. But we'll get a big following if I'm right about this. Nothing's going to happen because somehow I could feel in 2020 what Gerard was these mimetic rivalries spiraling up, and I wouldn't have put that name on them at the time. I've been since then subsequently recognized people needed the differentiation within the internet. I mean, we were getting multicultural so that we were all white, but we were also getting homogenized on these giant social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and such. And people didn't actually want to be all on the same platform. They wanted to be differentiated into meaningful communities.
Yeah.
Which the marching in the streets, I think the marching in the streets made you at least part of your city, right? You march physically. The BLM marches were interesting. You march physically through the streets of your own city.
Yeah. So you're physically present.
Yes.
In the geography of your hometown and offline.
Right.
They needed to protest to get off the internet. It was a collective logging off.
Yep.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And then this could so the opposite side, I did a post on masks, and I used all the bitmojis that I had of myself in masks. The masks, in fact, gave everybody difference because you wore different masks. They all started wearing like brand colors.
Yeah. Yeah, it was an accessory.
But it was like so here's my big mask theory now. I think that you were wearing something I don't have mine to hand, right? That I wore these belly dancer masks, and I realized I liked them because they moved, right? So the thing I disliked about the masks for most people is they were static, right? They were just as you were saying, the mimesis is erased because your face is covered in that muffling way. And I like my belly dancer mask because the beads move, and so you get this feeling you get this sensation of life with the. So everybody, if you're gonna wear a mask, at least have beads. But that, people became I think they become very attached to the mask because it gave them a belonging. It's livery. It's colors. It gave them the colors that they wanted to participate in, and in my
gang colors.
They gave them gang colors. And in the post that I did on, I can't remember, it was To Mask. No, it wasn't To Mask or Not To Mask. It was the other one. I'm using all my Bitmojis with all these different colored masks that the app would generate for your face, and sort of saying, I get this, right? It's as you and I've just been, it's wanting to be in the light, in the color, taking on the color of all of it's like, and they were coloring their faces in effect.
So it's kind of so that effect is kind of like being on the internet and not homogenized by it. It's the resistance to internetization.
Curiously, yes. And that we started. Maybe we can bring this around to a like coherent theme. I made a cover for tonight's, and I have to make a completely different one. We're in the mimesis, and we're wanting to imitate. And the problem, of course, of being on the internet is you're an avatar. I mean, yes. in Facebook, what I initially saw the masking as like people putting the filters on their faces on Facebook, which is part of it, right? It's branding you into a group. But there's also the sort of loss of your face, the degree to which it is out here in the internet, projected into the digital constantly, and the masks, at least physical, you were protected, right? I think they're protection against a lot of this.
Yeah, well, it's like Michael Jackson started to mask, probably as the effect of having been paparazzi'd to death, right. The constant stealing of your image. The only way of guarding that is by covering up. People can't get you when you've got something across your face in that way. So they're hiding their identity to preserve it.
Right.
In this constant loss of it.
And interestingly enough, again, you and I have talked about this. It's like we're trying to develop manners for all of these different e-duchies.
Yes.
What happened in 2020 was the global e-world shattered into all of these locals. I mean, I think this is, I mean, my theory of the lockdowns too. I think people actually wanted to stay home because they were, I mean, I had that experience to a certain extent. I'd been traveling a lot for fencing tournaments and conferences and this, and my first experience on getting locked down was, ooh, I can play with my blocks now. Ooh, and I can make all these token videos, right? It's like it was like a relief from, and people have said this, right? Now, it's hard for people to go back out into the world and be, in social contact with people, but that there was that whatever Floyd was the sacrifice for, this spiraling rivalry of sameness, I think, was a lot of it.
It makes sense. No, that makes sense. It's the spiraling rivalry trying to break out of white supremacy, which in the Girardian world, or the Girardian way of thinking about it, is sameness.
Right. The spiraling rivalry is sameness. And that's what he's writing in the 90s about this a lot. And he's saying, the deconstructionists are all into différance, right? They're all into, he has some great stuff about how silly the structuralists are. Or whatever, these French theorists, right? Because he's French, but he's largely working in the United States as a scholar, and they're missing the point that what human beings do is their rivals. The violence develops out of likeness, not out of difference. And once you say that, it seems like perfectly obvious. So we'd say the founding myth of all cultures, all civilizations, Girard says, if you look at it, you'll find a collective murder in there somewhere. And that goes to what he says happens in the Cain and Abel story, right? That Cain is the founder of cities, but he's murdered Abel, right? So the founding of a city is it's this collective coming together to throw out the demon. Then makes the city have a transcendent understanding of itself as a collective, and that transcendence gives birth to the divinity.
The deification of the scapegoat.
Right.
Which goes back to the Osiris thing.
Right. Yes.
Yep. The murderous, the primary myth. Yep. It makes sense. So biblically we have Cain and Abel. And this is why, I mean, a lot of the conversations we've had in the chat too is with people who are arguing against urban environments and arguing against cities, because Cain was the one that built the city and he was evil and he was the manslayer.
Right.
So, I mean, it makes sense to argue that. The problem is that we are inherently city dwellers and we're looking forward to the heavenly Jerusalem. So the issue isn't necessarily cities are evil, it's that this mechanism is human from the beginning.
Right.
The mechanism of murder as a civilization cornerstone.
Right.
Which reveals more about us as human beings than it does necessarily about the city itself. The city being the reflection of us, our violent tendencies needing that violent unity in order to stay cohesive.
Right. That comes. So we have Casey saying melting pot is the term you're looking for. Yes, I think everybody blended together. Melting pot is all, gray, I suppose. Nobody brown when dragged through the mud, Lodi says. Yes, Bishop, could C19 vax be considered a baptism? Interliminal space under control of the priest emerged, changed. Yeah, so this is not where we'd planned to go with tonight's stream, which is fine.
No,
We're streaming under the pressure of understanding the sacrifice. I think we need to work through the sacrament part of this. Right now we're just getting the collective murder as the foundation of culture, civilization, ethnos, and the way in which we've actually experienced it ourselves in the world recently. Mortloaf Bear says, interesting stream. Thank you, Mortloaf Bear. Okay, so I had another thought that we needed to pull in. The founding of cities, the collective, the Cain and Abel. Well, there is the revelation, which is what I was aiming at, and we don't have time to work through, but maybe I can hint at. I don't know. Maybe actually all my slides come in the last 10 minutes. That's okay too. So no, but the thing is, this is actually the way it's been for me. It's like wrestling with this. I've thought a lot about the Aztec sacrifices because on a regular basis I teach Bernal Diaz's Conquest of Mexico along with De las Casas's Brief History of the Indies. So understanding the reality of these sacrifices and then seeing them, in this juxtaposition with this Aztec image with the feathers that was sent to the Pope of the Mass of St. Gregory. And it's like, what are we seeing actually in this iconography? I think it was Kiltz when you were saying something about what is revealed to us in the moment of the sacrifice. What's revealed in the normative, and you say polytheist because every city has its own deity, because they're all founded on these collective murders.
Different monsters.
They're different monsters. I think this is all going to be in Violence in the Sacred. I need to read his actual breakdown of the different myths. He kind of assumes it in the later stories in Scapegoat and things that all mythology is here. And I'm like, will you please give me some examples? That there's monsters, they're all monster slayers too. So I think there's the monster slayer as the founding person of the city, then monster hero is a pair that's necessary there as well. And Christ is the sort of I don't think I can unpack this in 10 minutes. We just
okay.
leave it.
We have to hold it.
Annie saying cities are of God. Yes, but so okay, I think that this is maybe what's like the myth, the feeling of this collective reality. That's what that let's talk about that for the last little bit here, because that I think is what is so mysterious, and it's vexed social scientists, since there was social science about 100 years ago. Again, Girard he's making fun of all the social scientists, saying, don't you realize that religion is at the center of all human society? Where did he get this? I'm flipping through my book right now.
Well, it's a collective reality. It's a shared story to cultivate people. If you don't share the story, you don't share the reality. Like the Jim Bob cartoon that we showed last week in the stream, with the girl in the Disney outfit and the little girl holding the Bible, and
right.
The child in the Disney outfit is saying to her, "Oh, my mom says you've been indoctrinated." Different doctrine, different reality. So we have to have a shared story.
So I think it's not just the shared story, it's that shared activity. It's the actual transcendence of the mob.
Participating in the story.
Right.
Through violent murder.
Right. And so once you start thinking this way, you start realizing what it's like to be in this mob that goes after the victim. The victim becomes to the mob a monster who deserves to die, because the monster has carried all of this evil. The mob kills the monster. The monster is, because they've acted together. I mean, what I keep thinking is like it's the chimpanzees killing in a group, right? That collective murder is going to be frenzied. It's Bacchic. It's the Dionysian ripping apart of the King of Thieves, whose name I'm forgetting. E. Michael Jones uses that story a lot to say, this is what the sort of lack of
restraint.
Right, the lack of restraint looks like. It's horror, but Girard would be saying it's like, well, this is actually what created the feeling of common activity. It's like the source of the transcendence is what we're struggling for right now. That feeling of divinity, of reality outside of the material. And Girard dances around this a lot. I think we've actually gotten closer to it talking about it tonight than maybe he has for me so far. But he's saying it's this transcendence. It's just transcendent. And maybe you don't get it unless you've been on that march down the street about this horrible villain that you've been targeted against. Something like that. It's
well, you're participating in the mythology, so you don't get it until you participate in the mythology, which is an argument for liturgy,
right?
Which goes back to where we were starting out, trying to explain why the scholastics talking about the Trinity is different to the liturgical understanding of God, because it's experiential. So trying to explain why this thing happened is not the same as going in the march through the city and having the same collective experience with everyone else chasing the monster. One's liturgical, and it's the living participation in the mythology that makes the difference. That's why they transcend. Because they're eating the scapegoat. And then there's a connection with the idolatry, the connection with the deified monster. Personally. then there's the cult. Does it make sense?
Oh yeah, I think we just stop there.
Okay.
I didn't want to stop because you kept, yes, something like that's it, right? And that, so this is where I'm constantly, so it was surreal to me. I think maybe because I was actually sort of mentioning this to you before we started, but I'm trying to write an academic paper right now, a revised one that I gave last summer, which is about the difference between law and grace, or like the presence of grace in law, which is complicated and challenging for me. And I was asked to do it because it's like Mary is called advocate, and what does that mean? He's like, where's grace in that? And I'm like, I don't know how to explain this, because I didn't know what to think about it. I didn't like, well, do you mean mercy? And the person who was asking me is like, no, grace. And I'm starting to actually just this week to get, I think what she was trying to get me to say was something about that presence of the divine in the moment. When in a law court, it's like, you know, the judgment, I think the judgment needs grace as well as the mercy. We always think mercy is the grace thing, but I think it's the truth coming through somehow. And what I came up with last summer when I gave the talk was, well, okay, we usually in our scholarly context, we study law as a text, we study prayer as texts, and insofar as we study them as text, we can never seem to find the thing that is the motivating reality. It's always elusive. It's always outside of, the text. And then of course I read a lot of McLuhan, and I came up with last summer the medium, right? That the context in which Mary is called advocate is always a song. It's the Salve Regina. And I found almost no scholarship either on the Salve Regina as a text or, you know, medieval commentaries on the Salve Regina. Lots and lots and lots of musical settings and miracle stories about it being sung. And then I'm like, okay, dokie. we're in that. I mean, so I think as an antidote to the mob, it's the song, it's the singing. So I was very interested that you started tonight with saying it's different. It's like, it's not the musical score that's written down. It's the music that you're participating in. And we have now at least set the stage for your being now curious about why we need liturgy. And that it's participatory in this way. It is, I think the singing, liturgy is sung in the proper sense. And that the singing is a different kind of engagement from logical debate or logical argument, which makes it true in a way that's like grounded more powerfully than any dialectical argument is going to be. Maybe for most people, I think sometimes dialectical arguments can have this participatory feeling, but only when you're actually doing them. So one, you pointed out that the ortho-bro community tends to like those scholastic debates. Guess how they're doing them? Online, together, ritually. I think the debates are a ritual too. And that's why they're so compelling for them. It's not because they're making good arguments. Gotcha. It's because you wanted the ritual. You wanted to be in it.
Yeah.
You wanted to be in the stream.
Yeah. Gotta get high.
Gotta get high.
Yeah.
We will teach you how in subsequent episodes. Aren't you glad you joined us on the Ark tonight?
We went so far away from where we planned.
We actually had a plan, and the ship just sailed off into sacrifice. Yeah, so I'm looking at the chat now and they're saying, is Bear Armstrong, is this another hermeneutics debate? No. Because I actually do hermeneutics, and so I know what the difference is. Not a debate for Hermes Armstrong. Locked in. I'm different. Okay, I think they're fine. Loading there. Can you get there without the Hebrew history? No. We will talk about this more next time on the Mosaic Ark. Join us on Unauthorized TV, on YouTube, in our podcast form, in our multi-incarnational Trinitarian digital sensorium. Thank you for joining us. Good night.